Hi everyone, welcome to week 9. We're going to be taking a look at indirect statement. All right. Indirect statement is essentially reported speech, and I'll talk about what that means as we get there. I thought we'd take a look at infinitives, which we did last week, but infinitives are a big part of indirect statement. So just make sure that you know those forms at the top. All right, this is the slide from last week. The different infinitive forms, and to some extent how they're translated. But what we're going to see is that with indirect statement, you're not necessarily going to translate the infinitive with that too. English uses the indicative to express indirect statement, where Latin uses the infinitive. But we'll take that in some examples. All right. So this is just right from your textbook. These are the 3 things you need for indirect statement. So you're going to have an infinitive. That's going to be the verb in indirect statement. The subject of the infinitive is going to be accusative, and then there's going to be what's called a head verb. You can see that outline there, which sort of introduces the indirect statement. So in other words, you're going to have your main clause with a head verb, all right, plus that subject accusative, and that is optional, but if there is an accusative, it will be in the subject, plus your infinitive, and that's going to be the main formula in Latin for the indirect statement. And then at the bottom here, you can see some examples. All right, so head verb, subject accusative, infinitive. And the important thing is, in Latin, indirect statement is used with an infinitive. In English, you can see that it is used with an indicative. All right, so videt te manera. All right, he sees that you are staying. Right, so the direct statement is you are staying. Right, and then the indirect statement is he sees that you are staying. Now, the book puts that in parentheses. I think it's important to use the that just because it's a little more formal and it makes clear that you're dealing with an indirect statement. All right. So just some other examples there. I'm not necessarily going to go through all of them, but I will point out the constituent parts: head verb, head verb, head verb, subject accusative, subject accusative, subject accusative, and then of course infinitive, infinitive, infinitive. And again, it's important to emphasize that in English we don't express the indirect statement with an infinitive. We express it with an indicative. So a common mistake that students make will say things like, he sees you to remain, right? Doesn't sound like English, but it's a little more literal, but doesn't make sense, so it can't be right. It's a little trickier if we had something like dicit te manera, all right, whose correct translation is he says that you remain. But a lot of students will see that infinitive and think he tells you to remain, right? And Latin wouldn't express that idea with an infinitive. It would express it with a subjunctive. All right, so head verb, subject accusative, infinitive, he sees that you remain. All right, and these are just the various head verbs, right? So this is just a list, and again, from your book of various head verbs. There are certainly more, but this is a pretty comprehensive list. By no means do you need to or should you memorize these, but rather kind of use them as a reference point, just to know the range of verbs that can indicate or introduce, I should say, an infinitive. And of course, the book categorizes them: speaking and telling, thinking, knowing, believing, perceiving, and then some others. All right, so just a list for you to familiarize yourself with. Okay, so sequence of tense. All right. In indirect statement, the tense of the infinitive is relative. What that means is the way that you translate the infinitive will shift based on the main verb. So the hard part is a present infinitive isn't always going to be translated in the present. Same with a perfect, etc. All right. These squares are arrows. For some reason, they don't translate, so apologies about that. There are a couple ways to think of this. One way is mathematically, that the present tense infinitive is the equal sign infinitive. So whatever tense the main verb is, that's what the tense of the infinitive is going to be when you translate it. So for instance, if I have a present main verb, the infinitive is going to be translated in the present. If I have a past main verb, the infinitive is going to be translated in the past. And that's what I mean by a relative tense, that the tense of the translation shifts as the tense of the main verb shifts. The perfect tense infinitive is the -1 infinitive. So if it's a present infinitive, if I move one back on sort of a timeline, then the infinitive is going to be translated in the past. I say, present tense main verb, that he went, past tense infinitive, to the store. That's going to be the perfect infinitive. And then it gets a little tricky because with a past main verb, one back from the past is the pluperfect. So I said yesterday that he had gone to the store 2 days before. And we'll see examples of this as it goes along. Excuse me. All right, so the future is the plus one. So if I have a present main verb, all right, the infinitive is going to be future, right? I say now that I will study tomorrow. There's my future main verb. And then if I have a past main verb, then it's going to be really just would. There's no real easy way to make that a tense. So I said yesterday, all right, let's say I said 2 days ago that I would study yesterday. All right, let's take a look at some more info/examples. All right, so here's that timeline. All right, so with the present main verb, right, there's my present main verb. All right, and obviously we're moving to the right, kind of towards the future, right, with the present main verb. All right, and these are some examples here. So we'll start with the present, and remember that's the equal sign. So Skio puellam winkere, I know now that the girl wins now. That's that equal sign, present and present. All right, so over here with the perfect infinitive to the left, I know now that the girl won yesterday. All right, and that's the shifting back one. All right, so if the present is 2018, that's going 2017. In the future, I know now that the girl will win tomorrow. All right, and the thing to do is kind of match up the infinitives. Oh, that's a bad highlight. All right, so you can see the different infinitives and how the translation changes based on those infinitives. You can see, too, that the main verb is the same in all the sentences. It's just the infinitive that changes, and that's why the tense changes. Now, with the present tense main verb, life is relatively straightforward because basically the infinitives are just translated the way they sound. All right, with a past main verb, life gets a little trickier. Excuse me. All right, so again, if we start in the middle, present tense infinitive, I knew yesterday that the girl won yesterday. All right, so note that you have a present infinitive that's getting translated in the past. All right, if we shift over to the left, I knew yesterday, or let's say, yeah, I knew yesterday that the girl had won 2 days ago. And again, with that relative tense, right, the perfect says it's happening before the main verb because the main verb is in the past. Before the past is the pluperfect, and that's where the had won comes in. All right, and then, of course, the future, I knew yesterday, or let's say 2 days ago, that the girl would win yesterday, and that's that would I was talking about. And there's that future infinitive. All right. All right, so just kind of familiarize yourself with this idea of relative tense. It's a little tricky, but it's actually pretty straightforward once you get used to it. It takes a little getting used to, but it's very formulaic. Think about that formula, kind of the equal sign, the plus one, the minus one. And once you get used to it, it should be pretty okay. All right, and here's just a little sort of chart minus the timeline of exactly what I just did. Again, this is from your textbook, but it just sort of gives you the different translations with the different infinitives in both the present and the past. All right, so let's take a look at a text. All right, so I say ex hoc domu fugere cupere. All right, so this is a paraphrase, right? It's not from there. It's sort of a little simplified version. All right, so remember, you got your head verb, you got your subject accusative, and you got your infinitive. So iet is your head verb. It's essentially equivalent to dicit. All right, and then cupere, or well, let's say say, is my subject accusative, and then cupere is my infinitive. Now, you might notice that there's two infinitives there, fugere and cupere. That's going to happen. When you have two infinitives like that, there's a good chance, pretty much has to be, that one of those infinitives can take another infinitive. So cupio, cupere means to want, right? So he says, present, that he, say, wants to flee. All right, so really cupere is the main verb. Fugere is just the infinitive dependent on cupere. Fugere would be an infinitive no matter what cupere is. So he says that he wants to flee from this house. All right. All right, we just did number 2. And then say is the reflexive when the subject of the main verb, iet, is the same as the subject of the infinitive, cupere. Latin uses the reflexive to show that, right? So in other words, if this were eum, what that would mean is that the he of the iet and the he of the cupere are different people. Because it is say, it says that they are the same people. All right, let's take a look at this week's summatives. So you're translating the sentences. Again, keep in mind those indirect statement requirements and go back and check those out if you need to. So I'll do a couple for you. So remember, read through the sentence first. Nuntius ipse, nos timere cernit. All right, so I note a couple things. Nuntius is nominative. All right, ipse is nominative as well. So those likely are a unit. All right, because those are nominative, nos is likely an accusative. It certainly can be by form. It can also be nominative, but we don't have a mus for the we. Excuse me. And we already have a nominative, so good chance that it's accusative. Timere is an infinitive. I've got to figure out what that's doing. And then cernit is obviously my main verb with the T. As a head verb, that's going to indicate I'm in indirect statement. So the messenger himself kind of thinks or sees. That's cernit. That, and remember there is no word in Latin for that we are afraid. All right, so the messenger himself thinks that we are afraid. And again, remember there's no word for that in Latin. There's no ille, right, which is the word for that, but not this kind of that. That's just the way English expresses it, and Latin does not express it that way. All right, so let's do number 2. Legati dixerunt hostes urbem tradidisse. So again, as I read through, I see an I, which is likely going to be my nominative plural, especially as the first word. That's confirmed by the NT, right? That's my nominative plural ending. Hostes, again, can be either nominative or accusative. Because I already have a nominative, there's a good chance it's going to be accusative. Dixerunt is a head verb. Tradidisse is an infinitive. So that's going to indicate indirect statement. And then urbem is another accusative, so it looks like this indirect statement will have both a subject and a direct object, which is fine and pretty normal. All right, so let's just translate. The ambassadors said, all right, and note that you've got a past main verb and a perfect infinitive, so that's going to send us back one on the timeline. The ambassadors said that the enemies had handed over the city. All right, so the ambassador, sorry about that, said that the enemy, I'm going to go down, sorry about that, had handed over the city. All right, and remember that with that perfect infinitive, right, that's going to shift me back one. Since dixerunt is perfect, then back one from the perfect is the pluperfect. All right, so there's some examples. You can do the rest on your own. Look at the writing. All right, so we're translating into Latin. So when you're doing this, a couple things, and you'll note that they're kind of paired up, right, with different infinitives. So once you get the skeleton sentence, you're just changing the infinitive. But remember that in Latin, there's going to be no word for that, right? The English will have it, but Latin will not use that. And your basic formula, of course, in the indirect statement is going to be subject accusative, if you have it, plus the infinitive. And the way you get the tense of the infinitive is by figuring out the relationship between the infinitive and the main verb, right? And again, that mathematical approach might help. Is it the same as the tense of the main verb, equal sign present? Is it one before the tense of the main verb, minus one perfect? Is it one after the tense of the main verb, plus one future? All right, that's going to be it for this week. Please email me if you have any questions. And I'll be back next week. Thanks.